One of the problems of our society is that by having all responsibility assigned to the government, we have removed the pressure on individuals to be responsible for themselves, to feel that they have a set of values that they are entitled to pursue. So that, no, I don't believe there's...
I assume then that if somebody wants to smoke marijuana, that's their business too.
That's his business, absolutely.
Are we going to take that to heroin and addiction?
Absolutely. Now, let me go back on that one, because that's a very interesting thing. Even if on ethical principles, you believe it is right to prevent somebody else from smoking heroin, as a matter of expediency, it's a terrible mistake. The largest...
So is jumping off the bridge.
No, I don't mean that. I mean it's a terrible mistake for society to render heroin illegal, because that increases the harm which heroin does. Why do we have so much crime in the inner cities and in the cities? Over 50% of it is attributed to crime for the sake of acquiring money to buy heroin. Why is heroin so expensive? Because it's illegal. We went through this with prohibition. Whether you believe it's right or wrong to prevent people from drinking alcohol, we had the experience with prohibition in which we found that it did more harm than good. More important, the basic respect for law was eroded. Law-abiding people who would never ordinarily have broken the law broke the law in order to get a drink.
Because they knew that the law enforcement agencies could not possibly enforce with any efficiency the laws against the prohibition law.
But the reason they couldn't enforce it was because it wasn't publicly backed. If the 90% of the public had been in favor of the prohibition law, you could have enforced it.
But I'm promising you 90% of the public right now is in favor of enforcing prohibition against heroin.
And you cannot enforce it. I agree. I was understating my case. Even with 90% of the people, you can't enforce it. And it does vastly more harm today because it is illegal than it would do if it were legal. Let me point out for a moment that more lives are lost each year through drinking alcohol than through heroin.
But
if there's a case, if you're going to make the case for preventing heroin on the basis of saving lives, there's a much stronger case for prohibition of alcohol.
But there would be some who would argue that to relax law enforcement or to take away law enforcement pressure on heroin trade is to ensure that heroin deaths will meet and exceed alcohol deaths.
On the contrary, it would reduce the number of heroin deaths. Why would it reduce the number of heroin deaths? In the first place, many of the deaths come from impure or adulterated heroin or needles that are contaminated. In the second place, as we found in Prohibition, the fact of Prohibition encouraged alcoholism rather than the opposite. To the young people in particular, it became an adventure to go out and get drunk, to go to a speakeasy. Today, with heroin illegal, it pays a heroin pusher to create an addict. Because, given that it's illegal, it's worth his while to spend some money on getting somebody else hooked. Because once hooked, he has a captive audience. If heroin were readily available everywhere, it wouldn't pay anybody to create an addict. Because the addict could then go anywhere to buy it. You have had experience with this. Britain has had legalized, not heroin in general, but they have had an arrangement under which certified addicts can get heroin from physicians on prescription. And it's done very much less harm than our system has. So I have no apologies for believing that far less harm would be done to this country by legalizing heroin than is now being done by trying to enforce heroin prohibition.
I assume, like the baby in the car, you would support legislation prohibiting the sale of heroin and other addictive substances to juveniles.
Well, that's a very hard question. I think there is a different case for juveniles. But whether you could really handle the question, that's a question of expediency, not a principle. If I thought I could enforce it, I would be willing to say that for juveniles. But I'm not sure I could enforce it, and I'm not sure when I looked into it I wouldn't decide I did more harm than good even there.
I just don't believe that you can take away laws. I have children. If I don't tell them what to do and how to raise them, they won't know what we expect of them. I feel
there's nothing against you telling your kids what to do.
No, but I meant you compare the government to that, telling us what to do and deregulation and everything. I think we have to have something to go by.
Well, but you see, what you're expressing is precisely the paternalistic view of government that I object to. I don't believe government is the mother of children. I don't believe government is a father of children. I believe government is a way in which you and I and our fellow citizens achieve certain things jointly that we can't achieve separately. And I believe it is your responsibility as a mother to bring up your children in accordance with the values you believe. And I believe it's a cop-out for you to say, I want the government to do that for me. We already have gone very far in the direction of restricting our freedom. I need not go into all the details, but all of you are aware of the many ways in which you and I are not free to control our own lives in accordance with our own values. And there is a tremendous tyranny of the status quo. Each one of us will be very, very negative about the restrictions on freedom, except for those that benefit us. Now, that's a different story. It's far easier to get a law into effect than to repeal it, as we've all found out, because you always establish interest, vested interest, which is very hard for any of us to get back. The government is too big, it's too intrusive, it restricts what we can do, it's becoming our master instead of our servant, and we've got to react against it and cut it down to size.